Welcome back. Today in episode 3 of Classroom Hatchery Television, we'll check on our Atlantic salmon eggs and hatcheries, and then we're going to learn how to identify Atlantic salmon so that we can tell them apart from other types of fish. We're going to be joined by Dr. Catherine Pyman, a fish scientist and a former coordinator of the Bring Back the Salmon program. Catherine's going to teach us a bit about how to identify Atlantic salmon and a bit about Atlantic salmon lives. Then we're going to be joined by another special guest, Johnny Nene, who is one of our OFAH Fitzsimmons Fish and Wildlife Conservation interns. Johnny's going to be joining us for the rest of our episodes, bringing us a fun segment called Fishy Facts, where Johnny is going to be teaching us about other types of cool fish from around the world. Let's start by checking on our eggs and hatcheries.
All right, so checking on tank number 1. The filter is running. We can see the waterfall coming out of it. The air pump is running with bubbles coming out of the air stone. And our temperature is 3 degrees Celsius. Now our target for this tank is 4 degrees, but it isn't going to hold steady at exactly that temperature. It will vary between 3 and 5, so this is okay. Now that we have our eggs, we'll also check on them. What I'm looking for is to see if they're starting to hatch, and also to see if any of them have turned white, which means that they are dying. We likely will have some that will die. That is perfectly normal. But if there are a bunch of them dying, then we might have an issue that we need to resolve. None of them have turned white, and none of them are looking like they're getting close to hatching. Let's check on tank number 2. Filter, check. Air pump. Oh, Houston, we have a problem. No bubbles are coming out of the air stone.
So what I'm going to do with this air stone is I'm going to start back over here where it's plugged in and make sure it's got power. I follow the cord along and I see that it's plugged in. And I know that this receptacle has power because the filter is also plugged into it. But maybe it's just this one plug. So I'll unplug it, plug the filter in where it was plugged in, and that filter just started right back up. Plug the air pump in, and I can actually hear the air pump. Let's have a look at the air pump. Aha! Here's the culprit. It's come unplugged. Must have gotten pulled off maybe when I was moving something around. It was working yesterday, so it probably happened today. So I just got to make sure that that's nice and tight on there. Oh, and there goes our bubbles. All right, the air pump has been fixed. The hose got pulled off. Let's check the temperature. And the temperature of tank number 2 is 7 degrees Celsius. So it's sitting right at the temperature we want it to be. Let's check the eggs in this tank. And once again, I'm looking for any eggs that have turned white. And that might happen. We might get some. But if we start seeing a lot go white, then we know that there might be something wrong in there. But everybody's looking pretty good right now. And they look pretty much identical to what they looked last week. So over the course of a week, there hasn't been much of a change, nothing that we can notice anyway. There's probably actually been a fair bit of change that's gone on inside the egg. So, tank number 2 is now good as well, once we rectified that air stone problem. Both tanks are good. If you fish, it's important for you to know and follow the rules about when and how many of a particular species you can target and keep. When it comes to Atlantic salmon, this is extremely important so that we're able to bring this important species back to Lake Ontario. If you fish or if you don't, learning how to identify different species of fungus, plants, and animals apart from one another can be a doorway into learning about the wonderful diversity of life that exists on our planet. How do we tell one species of fish from other species of fish? In simple terms, we're looking at characteristics of shapes, sizes, colors, the presence and absence of certain body parts, and the placement of body parts in relation to other parts of the fish.
Some fish have unique features, like barbels. Some have one dorsal fin, some have two. Some have stripes, and some have spots.
The salmon family, collectively known as salmonids, include salmon, trout, char, freshwater whitefish, and grayling. They all have slender bodies and this fleshy fin on their back near their tail called the adipose fin. Some members of this group, like lake trout, have a dark body with light spots, and other members, like our Atlantic salmon, have a light body with dark spots. In Lake Ontario, there are several species that look like Atlantic salmon. The rainbow trout, brown trout, Chinook salmon, and coho salmon. I'll now turn it over to Catherine to teach us how to identify Atlantic salmon from these species.
In Lake Ontario, Atlantic salmon are native. So are brook trout and lake trout. The other salmon and trout have been introduced from other parts of the world. Brown trout are native to Europe, not North America. Pacific salmon and rainbow trout are native to the west coast of North America, not to the Great Lakes. The juveniles can be tricky to identify. As these fish get bigger, they develop more distinct colors and spot patterns, and it gets much easier to tell them apart. In identifying the adults, the first thing to look at is the gill plate. Both Atlantic salmon and brown trout have spots on the gill plate, and usually no spots on the tail. To tell these two species apart, there are two key things I want you to look at. One is the length of the mouth. Brown trout have large mouths. In brown trout, the upper part of the mouth will extend past the eye, whereas in Atlantic salmon, it stops before the end of the eye. The other thing to look at is the tail. The end of the tail in brown trout is a straight line, whereas in Atlantic salmon it is indented. There's a couple other things you can look at as well. Brown trout tend to have orange in their adipose fin, whereas Atlantic salmon do not, and brown trout tend to have much more spotting that goes farther down their body. Did you know that, as biologists, we can take a scale from a salmon and look at it under a microscope? It tells us a little about what that fish did. Here we can see that this fish came and spawned 1 year. You can see the mark where it absorbed some of the scale for nutrients, and then that fish migrated back to the lake, grew some more, and returned the next year to spawn for a second time. As a fish migrates upstream to find spawning habitat, it might encounter barriers. There are two types of barriers. We have natural barriers, often in the form of waterfalls, and we have man-made barriers. Natural barriers are neither good nor bad. They are just part of the landscape. Where we have man-made barriers, we can use fish ways to get fish past them, and even record species using cameras. Imagine that your job was to tell these fish apart. In some years, there were over 25,000 fish swimming past the cameras. Animal migration is fascinating. The sheer abundance of critters that move from one place to another, even in our own backyard, is amazing. We used to have Atlantic salmon, American eel, and other species that would migrate upper streams to spawn. They used to number in the hundreds of thousands. Our streams at that point were open and accessible, and we hadn't destroyed habitat by cutting down trees. When we started to alter that, we lost the abundance of our native species. Many species travel upstream to spawn. They leave behind their eggs, and then some of them die, and some will return next year, like Atlantic salmon. Some species always die after they spawn. It's part of their life cycle. Once they come upstream, every single fish will die. But those dead fish leave behind nutrients for the stream. They feed algae, they feed invertebrates, and they even feed other fish. So that means all of those nutrients brought into our streams actually help to produce more fish. So next time you're outside, notice the abundance, diversity, and function of all these fish.
And welcome everybody. I'm Johnny Nene, and I'm the OFAH Fitzsimmons Financial Group Fish and Wildlife Conservation Intern. And I'll be your host through a series of segments called Fishy Facts. During these episodes, I'll be giving you guys a scoop on some cool native, invasive, and exotic fish species from around the world. Together, we'll investigate their life histories and unique adaptations that illustrate the incredible diversity of fish. And to kick things off, I've got something special for you guys this week. We're going to talk about an ancient fish from our own backyard, the Lake Sturgeon. Let's take a look. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about Lake Sturgeon. Lake Sturgeon are Ontario's largest and longest living freshwater fish. They're ancient and they've remained largely unchanged for 200 million years. And they're huge. They can reach lengths of 2.2 meters and weigh over 240 pounds. That's heavier than the average NFL linebacker. They can also reach ages of over 150 years old. But what do they look like? Let's take a look. Here we have a replica of a lake sturgeon. As you can see, they have torpedo-shaped bodies with elongated snouts that have 4 barbels underneath on the ventral side. Their heads are bony, but their internal skeletons are made mostly of cartilage, which is the same stuff that our noses are made out of. They also have 5 rows of bony plates that run along their body called scutes, which slowly disappear as the fish grow older. Young lake sturgeon can be gray or brown to greenish gray in color and have varying degrees of black splotches that slowly disappear once they reach about 60 centimeters in length. Adults, as you can see, are gray or olive brown with white bellies. Lake sturgeon live in cool waters at the bottom of deep lakes, rivers, and streams. They prefer sandy or silty substrates, but have also been found over gravel and cobble. They're bottom feeders, and they use the barbels under their snout to help them detect their prey items, which can consist of worms or leeches, aquatic insect larvae, mollusks, crayfish, or other small organisms. They lack teeth, so they use their extendable lips to suck up their prey items as they're cruising along the bottoms. And lake sturgeon take a very long time to reach maturity. Males aren't ready to spawn until they're about 20 years of age, and females not until they're about 25 years of age. Once reaching maturity, a female may only spawn once every 4 to 6 years, and they'll travel up to 400 kilometers to their spawning grounds, which are in fast-flowing streams. Depending on their age and size, a female may lay up to 500,000 eggs at one time. The eggs are deposited over top of rocks and logs to which they adhere. Now let's talk a little bit about the history of lake sturgeon in Ontario. Lake sturgeon were once prolific across all of the Great Lakes. However, intense commercial fishing between the mid-1800s and early 1900s took a massive toll on their population. Many populations have yet to recover, and there are currently 3 populations that are listed as at risk in Ontario. Well, I hope you guys have enjoyed learning about the lake sturgeon as much as I've enjoyed sharing with you. So please be sure to tune in next time where I'll have some more cool and exciting fishy facts. Thanks guys, we'll see you next time.
It can be difficult to remember all of the details that distinguish one species from another. For centuries, naturalists have been using art to help them. Drawing is one of the best ways to do this. By drawing a species, be it a flower, a bee, or an Atlantic salmon, you put it on paper and into the depths of your mind. Thank you, Johnny and Catherine. In our next episode, we're going to be learning about Atlantic salmon life cycle from our friend Kat Lucas from Ontario Streams. Until then, keep on swimming upstream.